All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. With me today are my friends, my colleagues, Stephanie Vaughan and Tom Trush. A quick intro for those who actually are first for meeting Tom and Stephanie. We'll start ladies first. Stephanie and I have been working together for a long time, many years. She's got hundreds of millions of dollars credited to her name, just the strategies and insights that she's been able to provide some of the world's greatest thought leaders. We've been fortunate enough to bring her in as one of our co founders. Mr. Tom Trush, similarly, we've also got hundreds of millions of dollars credited to the work that we've done together. Tom and I have been together since 2010. After reading one of his books, it just sort of really resonated, and we came together. We've worked on a number of different strategies, and it's been a lot of fun. So it's really a pleasure to bring two of my most both trusted colleagues and valued colleagues on today's podcast. And we've seen a lot. Both of us, or all of us, have been through the bullish markets. We've been through the bearish markets. We've gone through good times. We've gone through bad times, both economically, as well as, let's face it, growing a business is never just a linear straight line up. Even in growing a business, we've faced our own challenges and our own bumps in the road and whatnot. So today we're really going to be talking about $1 million mindset. And the reason why I felt this is a really important topic to bring to you is if you just jump on social media right now, you're going to notice that mindset is very polarizing. You've got some people who are convinced that the world is over. You've got other people that are convinced that this is the best thing that could ever happen to us. You've got both sides looking around thinking that one another is dumb and stupid and doesn't understand things, and mindset is an issue. And when you look back at this point, like several hundred episodes that we've created on the Beyond Seven Figures podcast, and we've interviewed 7, 8, 9 figure entrepreneurs. The interesting thing about it is when we really drill down to what has been the biggest factor to your success, they all come down to mindset, right? So I want to drill into mindset, not just from, hey, what's going on politically in our country and how do we adjust to that? It's also, you're going to balance mindset and issues with mindset and just every day, whether it's boredom, lack of energy, lack of excitement for your company. We're going to talk about that and how you can make those adjustments. So let's start with Stephanie. When we kind of talk about sort of, let's call it the $1 million mindset, what comes to mind when we say $1 million mindset for you?
A lot comes to mind. I think especially, as business owners, the thing that really sticks out for me, and I say this a lot to my clients, is you've got to work harder on yourself than anything else because you are the example. You are what people look to in your company. And so if you're showing up in a peak state, confident, you're in this heightened condition of clarity, you got energy going, people get addicted to that. They get excited by that. But if you show up and you're stressed and you're anxietied out and you're, angry or frustrated, that has an impact to the rest of your team. And it has an impact to the outcomes of your company, of your company and your decisions and what you do. And so Tony Robbins talks a lot about this. And I know Charlie and you and I are, have a lot of experience in working with Tony, but it's about getting yourself into a peak state. And so we either get to be proactive and disciplined and intentional every morning, every day we wake up, that we open our eyes, we get to decide what kind of day do we want to create for ourselves. When we're not intentional and we're not disciplined around how we are emotionally, how we are physically, and we don't get intentional around, how to get into that peak state, then we end up being reactive to the things that go on around us. And we all know, especially as business owners, that we have those days, right? We have those days that are going to knock us to our knees. We have those days that are going to give us our biggest challenges, that are going to make us question, why am I even doing this? Why am I even in business? I could just go get a job somewhere and not have to deal with the stress of taxes and this and that. And I think that a lot of that comes from, are we going to react to everything and respond to everything around us, or are we going to get intentional? around how we operate physically, mentally, emotionally, because we're not robots. And so I think that as human beings, I always say, and I look, again, I look in the mirror as well, is how do I work on myself? How do I improve myself as a leader, as a business owner, so I can also set the example for those that I work with and to create the outcomes that I want. But I think there's a real difference between intentionality and being reactive to that around us. And we get to choose that. So a lot of that is a choice.
And Tom, what comes up to you when we talk about $1 million mindset?
I think the easy thing when you hear a word or group of words like $1 million mindset is you immediately think financial from a financial perspective, money, that type of stuff. And yes, that from a mindset perspective, you need a certain mindset to succeed financially. However, there's a lot of other areas that we have to focus on, with mindset. Right now, a lot of podcasts I've been hearing about Sahil Bloom. In his book, he talks about the 5 types of wealth and basically looking at those, and it really does tie into mindset because he talks about how there's 5 areas, and it's time, social, mental, physical, and then of course the financial side. Well, with mindset, there are certain things that are more important, I would say, out of those 5 areas. And personally, like, I believe that physical, like a focus on physical health, all that type of stuff, is super important because that controls your mindset from a business perspective. But then in the case of those 5 areas that I mentioned, like, you can't enjoy all the other areas if you're not physically healthy. And so that's a big part of mindset, because if we're not feeling physically healthy, like, our mindset just it's lost. Like, we can't focus. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of $1 million mindset is really looking at, for me, of course, how you are from a mental standpoint, but then making sure that there's a physical aspect, because that really does, as much as people might not believe it, it really does affect what we do from a business perspective, and really ensures that our mindset is in the right place.
I got to ask you, how many miles do you run in a week?
It's always, the goal is always at least 40 a week.
40, so not four,
40,
but
yeah, at
40
least
a
40 a
week.
week. Yeah.
So somebody speaking about the physiology of things, I think that you're a good ambassador for that, because you've always been very focused, on your health, and something I'm very passionate about as well. But yeah, I admire that about you.
Even when we were out in California all together as a team, Tom was up and out. I mean, he's so disciplined to making sure that, he gets those runs in, because we had a long day full of meetings and whatnot. But for Tom, he understands that this is such an important part of his mindset being cleared. I mean, he was up before breakfast, and I don't even know how many miles he ran.
Well, and look at how he inspired everybody else on the team, right? So that's a perfect example of what I was saying earlier. Tom gets up and Joe's like, I'm going to go. And Walker's like, I'm going to go running with you. And then you and I are like, no, we'll walk.
And then he made us do the cold plunge.
Yeah, right. Right. So
Yeah, everybody has their own thing. And it's just such an important aspect of mindset, because, starting your day with wins, that really propels the rest of the day. And I would argue starting your day with doing something that sometimes you just don't necessarily want to do, but then you get it done and you feel so much better. And it just gives you momentum for the day. Because we know, as once the business day starts, we are hit with so many decisions that we have to make, so many deadlines that we have to hit, client demands, all that kind of stuff. And if you're going in and starting the day with that negative mindset and not starting it with wins, then you're already behind.
in your brain, it's constantly interpreting, physical cues from your body. So it's like this feedback loop. So, it's going to reinforce your emotional state, whether it's good or bad.
One of the things that I want to kind of bring up is, I always tell my kids, you got to play with the best set of cards you have, right? Play the best hand you've got. That's just life. You play the best hands you got, right? And so there are some people that are just natural geniuses. And so you'll see their success, and maybe they're overweight and they don't get sleep and they have a terrible diet and all this other stuff, but they have enormous amounts of success. And you know what? They just have different aces in their hand. what we aim to do when you want to be the best is figure out what needs to happen to give us the greatest edge possible. And health can be one of those things. Like, we get paid, all of us, all of our listeners, and all of us, we get paid in proportion to the quality of our decisions. And so if you get up in the morning and you've got brain fog and you're like, oh, I can't set a meeting before 11 because I just can't think straight. And then you juice yourself up with caffeine and then you wonder, why am I always so anxious? And, I'm just like, I'm just, I'm feeling this chest pain and I just, I get angry quick and all this other stuff. It's like, well, you have intentionally been willing to accept, you know, lower cards in your deck than if you said, okay, what needs to happen in order for me to optimize my brain so I can think clearly and more effectively? And, that can be nutrition, it can be exercise, it can be, a whole bunch of different things, but it doesn't mean that there are exceptions to the rule. You have to do it. It just is like, can you add this extra ace in your hand? And if you can, that gives you a little bit of an advantage. I was at the races this weekend. For those of you who've been following me for a while, you know that my son is training to be a professional race car driver. And so we had this conversation, which comes up all the time with his trainers. And it's like, look, you can get to 0 to 80% of being the best in your industry actually pretty easy. 0 to 80%, pretty easy. You just bite down, work hard, get some good advice, and you can get to 80%. When you get to 80% to then close the gap to 96%, that becomes exponentially more difficult. Now you have to start doing things that other people aren't doing. Hard work's not enough that's going to be able to get you there. You have to be able to be much more strategic and be much more deliberate, much more intentional. But then if you want to close the gap between 96% and being the number one, every fraction of a percent is so much harder than anything you've ever done in the past. And every little edge makes a big difference. Like my son, the difference between him and the leader of the race that he was in was 8 tenths of a second. 8 tenths of a second. For perspective, that's 8 tenths of a second, right? And so all he's trying to do is figure out what needs to happen for me to shave 1 tenth of a second more. And what about one more tenth of a second? And one more tenth of a second. Versus a year ago, it was about how do I shed a couple seconds off my time? Now it's no 1 tenth. And at times it's 1/100th of a second, which when you're traveling at 70 miles an hour around a hairpin turn, that's a difference of one foot between one or the other. So, in business, like health is one element, and that's for sure, and what you consume and the different things that you put in your body. But let's actually go one other element of $1 million mindset. This is actually something that first really I began leaning in on from Tom. He sent me a t-shirt that said it on the chest, which was, you remember what it says, Tom? Embracing what?
Embrace discomfort.
Embrace discomfort. So let's talk about embracing discomfort now from the standpoint of the entrepreneur and the business leader, and why you find embracing discomfort is an essential part of $1 million mindset.
It's one of those things where embracing discomfort is something that is critical, because the reality is we're going to have a lot of discomfort in business. A lot of uncomfortable situations are going to come up. So when a big issue comes up, or a big decision or a big challenge, whatever it is, comes up, you want to have I don't want to say the mental capacity, but let's say more like the confidence that you're going to come to a solution. So I'm a big believer in purposely putting yourself in uncomfortable positions, because then once something uncomfortable comes up, then your mind doesn't think about how bad the situation is. Instead, it automatically starts working on what are the solutions. This isn't necessarily, a bad situation. I'm uncomfortable, yes, but I have a history of figuring out solutions in difficult situations where I purposely put myself in these situations. So now when something that unexpected comes up, my mind, my brain, like I have the confidence that I can figure out a solution. So again, I'm just a big believer that we have to put ourselves into uncomfortable positions, preferably in over long periods of time, to give our mind the strength to give us the confidence that when unexpected situations come up, that we will figure out solutions. And we saw this with the pandemic. A lot of people saw that when the pandemic came up, and it's not necessarily any fault of their own, but a lot of people, they just stop and they're thinking about the worst case scenarios that can happen. But when you're confronted with uncomfortable situations and have purposely put yourself in those situations, again, your natural tendency is to think, okay, how can I better this situation? What do I do? Charlie, you say, like, how could this be the best thing to happen to me? Like, what's your phrase?
Yeah, how can this be the best thing to happen to us right now?
Right.
Even if it is a challenge or a problem or a real issue, right?
And if you go in with that type of mindset, the tendency is for you to focus on solutions rather than complicating the problems. And so it's one of those things, well, understand that discomfort is a good thing. So embrace it, because ultimately that's going to give you the skills to figure out those uncomfortable situations that are to come up later on in your business journey.
That's one of my favorite terms because we have our t-shirts, right? And that's one of my favorite t-shirts is embracing discomfort. Because I think a lot of times when we're stressed or overwhelmed, we tend to gravitate toward what we're comfortable with.
Yes.
And when we do that, we don't stretch ourselves. We go to the gym, it's to break down our muscle to build muscle. And we got to remember that when you're doing something that you're not necessarily comfortable with, you're building your muscle, you're stretching yourself.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of times, again, we're all facing challenges and, issues. And so that's what we'll tend to, again, if we're not intentional, if we're not thoughtful about what's happening around us, then we can go into reactive mode and go to what we're comfortable with. But that's the time for us to challenge ourselves and go, what do I need to lean into? What am I afraid of that I need to face right now? And that's what I love about embracing discomfort. And I think it's something that we all get to work on because we all have habits,
Yeah.
right? And these habitual patterns put us into certain focuses because, again, right, where your focus goes, your energy flows. And so we get to decide, where are we going to put our focus? What are the habits that serve us versus the habits that don't? And when we're not intentional around it, we go to the habits that don't necessarily serve
Right.
us.
It's actually really simple for anybody that's listening going, well, what is it then? What is it that I could be doing that I'm not doing that would be put me in this position of discomfort? We all have them. It falls behind one word that if you catch yourself saying or you think about it, the answer behind this word is exactly what you're putting off because it's uncomfortable. And that word, should. Anytime you catch yourself saying, oh, I should do blank or I should whatever, the reason why you're not doing it is more often than not because it's uncomfortable, puts you in this position of discomfort.
That's when you say, I'm shooting all over myself.
Right, right. You talk about habits. If you just find yourself listening, anytime you say you should do something, that's usually what actually you must do, right? And that's usually the answer. What holds us back more times than not is because, we go to that place of, well, here's what's comfortable. Here's what I know I can succeed at doing. Here's what I know, which is easier. Here's what I know will get me there with a little less headache.
Well, that's also a sign of, if you're just consistently falling back on the things that you know that you can get done or you can do, it's a sign of cognitive overload. Because the mind, again, let's look at something where an unexpected situation comes up, something uncomfortable. Your mind naturally just starts thinking of, oh, this is so bad, now I'm gonna have to do this, now, oh, what am I gonna do this? And it's just like you're overloaded and your mind can't focus on anything else. And when those types of things happen, then from a founder or CEO perspective, what do? Like, we naturally fall back onto the busy work, the tasks we know we can get done.
Yeah.
You're not doing anything to advance, your company forward. You're just focusing on, well, I know I can check emails, I can reply back to emails, or, oh, I got this text, I can get that done. Well, I'll get that. Well, those are just, it's busy work. And we know from a CEO founder perspective, the task for CEOs and founders is not to focus on that busy work. Where CEOs and founders are most beneficial is the long-term vision, their mind working on those things that are progress the company, push it forward. And if you do find yourself just focusing on those menial tasks that really aren't doing anything to push the business forward, and that's a sign that you've got a mental overload, cognitive overload.
Well, and I think when we're stressed, I was just talking with a client the other day and they had to give a presentation and they were really, really stressed about it. And like, I don't know how professional speakers do it. Like, how do professional speakers that they've got to get to a place where they're not, they're just not nervous and, that they have control over that. And I said, no, that's not true. All professional speakers before they get on, they're still nervous. They still get that nervous energy that bubbles up. But what's different between you and them is that they have a set of tools, they have a set of practices that they do to channel that nervous energy to actually work for them. And I said, and that's something that you get to practice doing. And so I think it's the same thing in our work. We're going to have those days that are challenging. And that's why, when we come up against things that we don't want to do, it's that intentional practice to get us into a better state on how do we approach that? What are those tools for you to help? We're all going to have the crappy days. We're all going to get knocked down. We all know that.
Yeah.
We're all going to get knocked down. The question is how fast do you get back up?
Yeah.
How fast do you then turn yourself around to say, okay, that happened. Now, how is this working for me? What's the solution to this? What is it that I need to do next? Putting yourself in an empowering situation. Again, I think, Tom, you mentioned this, to have that confidence,
Yeah.
to get yourself back up. How fast do you do it, or how long do you allow it to knock you down?
You think about like all the self-talk that we end up as CEOs and entrepreneurs that we end up just like telling ourselves all the time. And it's the same reason why people fall off their diet. They look at themselves and they're like, well, I've been good, so I can go ahead and, I'm going to eat this or, I'm going to do this. And then they end up putting the weight back on again. And then they have to go back. And it's this constant like yo yo. And we see this too with CEOs. It's like, oh, I had a really good month. So then they take their foot off the gas pedal and they're like, oh, I had a really good month. So I worked real hard. I'm going to take this time to just like take my foot off the gas pedal. And then they go through cycles of feast and famine. And I had the very unique and fortunate opportunity of spending some time with Dan Gable. Now, for those who are not familiar with Dan Gable, Dan is known as one of the world's top athletes in the world. He went through the Olympics, winning the Olympics without ever getting a point scored against him. I think he's the only person to have ever done that in wrestling. And so when I asked Dan, we had dinner at his house, and I asked Dan, like, well, what was it? And he says, when you look at my competitors went through the Olympics and they're going, okay, I trained so hard for this. Now I can just take the day off and just like, whew, do nothing. And he goes, I got up early in the morning and I went for a run and I just kept training. I continued to lean in. Now, it's really important for people to understand that, an Olympic athlete, and we're intellectual athletes, like recovery is just as important as training. So you do need that recovery. And you have to have certain disciplines in place. Like I recommend not checking your email at the end of the day. Whatever the end of the day is when you shut your computer off, like that's it. You don't check your email anymore. You don't like check your email right before you go to bed. If you're not working over the weekend, which it's often a good thing to take the weekend off, you're not checking your email on the weekend, like you just disconnect. But you have to be real intentional, like Stephanie and Tom have been talking about, like real intentional. You just don't react. I'm going to check my email. I'm going to do this and that. Right. But then be real careful about telling yourself these stories about, I could take my foot off the gas pedal now. Because while you're taking your foot off the gas pedal, your competitor is sitting around a boardroom table saying, what do I need to do to take more market share away from you? And we live in this like weird culture right now where it's this glorification of you got to work less, you got to work less, you got to work less. And you get all these marketers out there that are like, hey, let me show you how to work less. But if that was really the secret, why are the wealthiest people in the world actually working more, not less? They're working more, not less. But on the surface, you look at them and you go, okay, they're working a lot of hours. But if you ask Tom and you ask Stephanie and you ask myself, how many hours do we actually work a week? Would probably say, oh, work? I probably maybe work maybe 5 or 6 hours a week. But then to the outsider looking in, they're like, no, 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 that's not true. I see you're working all the time, man. I see all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not work. Work is one thing, play is another thing. When I'm behind my desk and I'm talking to my clients or I'm talking to you guys and whatnot, when I'm developing strategies, it's what gives me energy. It makes it exciting. It's almost like my hobby. Like I love this stuff. So it's like, that's not work to me. So when we talk also about that $1 million mindset, it's like there are things that you do in your business that give you energy, and there are things in your business that take away your energy and suck that energy away from you. That's why Tom and Stephanie and I and the other members of our team make such great teammates, because there's stuff that I do that Stephanie would be like, "Oh my God, I don't even know how much you could pay me to do that. I do not want to do it." There's stuff that you do, Tom, that I'm like, "Oh my God, there's no way I can do it." But it gives you energy. It gives Stephanie energy. Like there's all these things that give us energy.
If anyone's going to walk away from this podcast, I hope that they walk away with one thing that I keep saying is intentionality, is being intentional around certain things. So, as Charlie and Tom probably both know, I run pretty high anxiety. So, I'm pretty amped just in general as a person. I'm probably worry more than most as a mom and everything else. And so, when I wake up first thing in the morning, again, this is something that, I'm not perfect, right? I wake up in the morning and my first thing is I'm anxious.
That's too bad,
I
Stephanie, because Tom and I have convinced our wives that we're
That's an ongoing.
I'm sure I'm alone in this feeling. Um,
perfect.
but I do. I wake up very anxious and almost every morning, even if it's a weekend. And it's a thing that it's kind of built in my DNA. And so it's something that I get to work through, where when I wake up in the morning, if I just lay there and I go through 10 things I'm grateful for, and I start going into gratitude, and I start just expressing thanks for, my family, my health, where we live, the opportunities that are in our business. It just, the shift in me energetically is so drastically different. So, this part has to, again, this is where I talk about intentionality, is be aware and conscious of how you're feeling and having a morning routine, whatever that is for you. Nobody has everything written. I can't lay out an exact morning routine that's perfect for you. You got to figure out what makes the most sense for you. But if you're rolling over and the first thing you're doing is grabbing your phone, getting into emails, or without first taking a moment to express gratitude or meditate or pray or whatever that is for you, to get yourself into a good state, I think it's just so important to have something in the morning.
There's real reason for this, though, Stephanie. Like, there's real reason for this, and I'm going to use the example of you being a mom, right? Because let's say we go into the mall, right? We go in the mall, and you're with your daughter, and we walk into the mall, and we walk into this, let's say, this clothing store, right? You're there with your daughter. What are you more likely looking at in that store?
Clothes.
Because you went in with the intention of, I'm going to go in, I'm going to find clothes for my daughter. I'll do the same thing at the mall. I'll go into the mall with my wife and my kids. We'll go into the store and my wife is looking at the clothes. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there going, why did they put their desk right there? That's the wrong location for the desk. They should be putting the desk over here. I'm wondering why they priced things there and they're making that offer. Because that's just, what I went into. Shopping's not my thing. So when you wake up in the morning, if you got this anxiety and you're saying to yourself, what are all the things that could go wrong today? Or I'm worried about this, or I'm worried about that. What it's going to do, for the same reason that you walk in the store and you go, okay, what are the clothes I'm going to get for my daughter? The person that gets behind their desk already saying, what are all the more things that could go wrong today? They're going to constantly see all the things that are going to go wrong. It's going to man itself over and over again. Versus if they walk into their office and they go, what are all the things I'm grateful for? How is today going to be the best day of the week so far, the best day of the month, the best day of the year? And they're going to see all the opportunities that are coming in front of them. When we started today's podcast, we were talking about politically, all the people that are saying it's going to be the worst thing ever, like they're seeing all the things that are going to
Yeah.
justify why it's the worst thing ever. you know, or they could go back and ask a question like Tom mentioned earlier, like, why could this be the best thing in the world for me right now? Like, what is it? We're going to start seeing opportunities that other people didn't see. It's a reason why 86% of our clients had the best years in history during COVID, when everything was locked down and everybody was saying this is the worst thing in the world. And we're talking, we had clients in the travel industry, we had clients in the restaurant industry, where their businesses were shut down, yet they had the best years ever. It's because their mindset changed. Hey, why could this be the best thing in the world for you right now? And they saw opportunities that nobody else could see because they were the only ones. Well, I don't want to say the only ones, but they were the few that just looked at it differently. So, Stephanie, you're right. Like, you get up in the morning, before you get behind your desk, you owe it to yourself. You owe it to yourself to say, what am I looking for today? Why could this be the best day in the world for me? I do the same thing that you do, Stephanie. I journal, and sometimes I'm just like, my mind's running a million miles an hour. I actually have a bunch of like prompts that when I journal, and then if anybody wants them, just connect with me on LinkedIn and just ask me for the prompts, and I'll go ahead and I'll send them to you. But it's like, one of the things that I write is, what are the 5 things that I'm grateful for today? How has the universe supported me recently, even in small ways? And what signs or synchronicities, I can't even say that right, have I noticed that show that I'm on the right track? Just constantly reaffirming, like, these things. Or when I start my day, I always start with the morning intention. What is my main intention for the day? How do I choose to feel and act throughout the day? And what small aligned actions will move me closer to my desired reality?
Well, and what's interesting about what you're just sharing, Charlie, is this is not like esoteric woo woo stuff. This is actually steeped in science where we have what's referred to as a reticular activating system. And so if you think about, we've talked about this before, like if you're recently we were looking for a car for my daughter. I have never ever 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 paid attention to Kia. But we were looking at a car. It was a really great deal. And then boom, everything I was looking on the road was this Kia, that Kia, this Kia, that Kia, right? Because it became a central focus for me. And it's science based. We do that naturally as human beings. Charlie, you've used this example where, you know, look in the room and pay attention to everything that's red,
Yeah.
right? Like look at all the things that are red in your room. And then after that, then you ask the question of the group, what's blue?
Yeah.
Right, so it's what you are paying attention to. And so we have so much stimulus coming at us at any given time, like thousands and thousands and thousands of things that are coming out at with. Could you imagine if our brains took in all of that all the time, every second of the day? We wouldn't be able to function. So it's a way of narrowing in on the things that matter most. And so as human beings, we get to decide. Again, this goes back to everything that we've been talking about, is where do you intentionally put your focus, being more disciplined around what you put into your brain, right? What are you absorbing? So, putting yourself into that peak state, being more intentional in the morning, doing some of the prompts that what Charlie said, because you are going to focus on something. And so this becomes your choice, is to decide, what do you focus on? Are you focusing only on the problems? If you focus on the problems, you're going to get more of them. Or are you going to focus on the solutions? Because if you focus on the solutions, you're going to get more of those. A lot of what's happening around us, whether it's politically, business wise, personally, is that we get to choose where we put our focus. And are we going to only focus on the problems? Or are we going to focus on all the things, the sky is falling? Or are we going to look at what are the gifts in all of this? And I really do believe, and it's something that's shown up in my life a lot, is, for everything that happens to us or for us, what's the gift in that? There's always a gift in everything, because usually it's a lesson, or it's a growth opportunity, or it's a door that opens because of another door that's shut. And so if we don't look for that, we may miss that gift. We may miss that sign. So I think that's, it's really important for us to be the stewards of where we choose to put our focus and our
I
attention.
mean, we can always look at some of the biggest challenges that we've had in our business, the ones that practically bring us down to our knees, begging for relief. And in those moments, you say, how could any good come out of this? But then when you fast forward a few years, then you begin to realize, wow, if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have made this decision, which brought me to this decision, which then got me to this person who I met, which then created this. And now I'm in a much better position. So, to your point, and Dr. John DeMartini references in his work that every negative comes with it an equal and opposite opportunity. Everything, all the way down to its smallest observable molecule, there's a positive and negative. And, there's never been a straight line observed in the universe ever. And when you look at the smallest molecule. Like it might look like a straight line, but then you look under a microscope and it's a whole bunch of little circles, right? That form that, that line. And so it's like yesterday's deserts were today's rainforests. We have up economies, we have down economies, all that other, fun stuff. But you mentioned something, Stephanie, and Tom, I'll bring this to you just to pick up on what Stephanie said. She's like, it's all the things that you're paying attention to, right? But I would also say, how much have you missed? And the perfect example of that, Tom, how many times have you driven the same road over and over and over again, maybe 1,000 times, or ran because you're running, right? Run the same road over and over and over again, and then you look over and you go, "Wow, I have never seen that house before."
Yeah, happens all the time, of course.
So in business, how many times are the answers right in front of our faces, and we've missed it maybe 1,000 times over? Sometimes it's the challenges that we've faced that force us to look in a different direction, whatever you believe, whether it's God or universal energy or whatever. Like, I believe that sometimes those negative things happen because it's like you've run by that house so many damn times, Tom, and you haven't paid attention. Well, you know what? Your shoes are going to come untied right here. You're going to trip and fall, whatever it is, just so finally, you could pay attention because we've been trying to show that house to you over and over and over again.
I think about, we talk about print. I don't know if the audience is very familiar with print, but it's an assessment of, what motivates you at an unconscious level. And it's a great assessment. And one thing, Charlie is like, we're both a 3, but I'm a 3-7, which is to enjoy life and be happy. And Charlie is to be strong and self-reliant. And so when Charlie's like, this is like a hobby, this is my work, I love doing this all the time. And for me, I mean, I love my work and I love what I do. And for me, it's also so much of me, and it probably is also as a female, is like my family
Yeah.
and spending time. And then I'm not saying that you don't like to spend time with your family, because I know you love spending time with your family. But that's a huge, huge driver for me. And I think that we get a look at, what does fill you up? What are the things that can add, joy into your life? And I think a lot of times when good things come up, because we're so like, I got to get this done, I've got the pressure of this, I feel overwhelmed, that when the good things happen, when something comes up that's really good, you win something, you land a new client, whatever that might be, that we just move on to the next thing and we don't stop and celebrate, and we don't acknowledge our wins. My daughter just, she just finished up her first semester at school. She's a senior. She's totally caught up in college and, all the applications and everything else. And, she was really stressed. She has AP classes and, she's a little go-getter. She ended up getting all A's in her classes. She's incredible. But leading up to that, there was so much stress around the test that she was taking, and she literally was crying at times. Like she was like, I'm not going to fail. And, of course she's tends to be a little bit of a fatalist. But my point is that when she got her grades, it had been 2 days since she got her grades and she found out her exams, and I hadn't even heard about it. And I got a notification from her school and they said, oh, grades are in. So I pulled them up and I was like, oh. So she came home and I'm like, babe, look at oh my gosh, you did so great. I'm so excited for you. And she's like, oh yeah, I found that out 2 days ago. And she was already on to the next thing. And she was already stressed about Spirit Week this week and, blah, blah, blah. And I said, babe, you got to stop and celebrate the wins. You got to stop and celebrate the work that you put into this, because that is what life is about. Life is about acknowledging the wins and celebrating. And I think, again, as in our own businesses, we got to remember, when you land a client, when something really great happens, stop, celebrate it, enjoy it, savor it, celebrate it with your team, because that's the good stuff. That's the sweetness of what we do.
Now, let's change direction. I completely agree with you, by the way, and that's so important. Look, it helps give us energy. I know we're pushing against the clock, so I do want to address something that comes up all the time. And Tom, I know you've heard it. This one word comes up quite often: burnout. So, a client comes to you and they say, "Oh, Tom, I'm just burnt out." What's that as a signal of for you, Tom? And how do you handle that from a coach perspective?
The burnout is a sure sign of you're doing lots of tasks that are not your strengths or that you don't enjoy doing. You talked about, Charlie, how doing this stuff, it doesn't feel like work. and it's something that you can do and it brings you joy. Well, burnout is the exact opposite. And we know that for like the super successful CEO founders, we know that they're really great at delegating tasks, getting those things off their plate that aren't their strengths, that they don't enjoy doing. But then the real successful ones, what they also do is they delegate decisions, because burnout is often a result of having to make way too many decisions. Plus, you've got all these tasks, that are piling up on your plate, and it's mental overwhelm. Really, if you're feeling that burnout, is really looking at, okay, what are those tasks I can take off my plate? But then, how can I give people within my team some more decision making power so it takes it off of your plate as well? And I'll push this back to you, Charlie, because I see this as something that you seem to have really embraced. I mean, I would say, especially after you mentioned our meeting in California. Naturally, there are tasks, we all take on within the company, but I've also noticed a change in just decision making and others having the ability to make decisions that you would typically make, in the past. And so, kudos to you for that. And I think it's something that a lot of CEO and founders can learn from, where don't just look to delegate tasks, but look to delegate those decisions, those big decisions, because, ultimately your time should be focused on making the decisions that move the business forward, not just keep it operationally running.
Well, I think I've come to realize that I'm only uniquely talented. It's my unique ability, just a small little bit of things. Tom, you have something that I don't have, that, you're uniquely talented, a subset of things. And Stephanie, you have a unique ability at a small subset of things, where I or any of the CEOs do their team a grave disservice is when I go to play in your playground, when I don't acknowledge what you're uniquely just brilliant at, and I decide, because I'm CEO, that I'm going to hold on to this and I'm going to make those decisions. But that's not what I'm uniquely gifted at. Like, but that's the part that keeps the business small. When I feel like I have to control everything, instead of being curious enough to be like, what is Stephanie uniquely better at than I am? And what is Tom uniquely better at than I am? And all the other members of the team, what are they uniquely better at than I am? And then, like, when you can hone into that, like, little bit of uniqueness, that unique ability, an explosion of innovation and creativity and everything just takes off. We have another member of our team, Walker, right? And Walker brings a certain element of brilliance to the team that is very unique to everybody that we have, and he's completely changed our retention and so forth. But he's come up with ideas that nobody really would have thought of if it wasn't for the fact that we empowered him to make these decisions. And I could say the same thing about you, Stephanie. I could say the same thing about Tom. I could say the same thing about Zach and Joe and so forth, on and on and on. And so it's like, sometimes you don't understand or realize what those unique abilities are until you give them the opportunity to try this. Like, hey, here's this, what we're trying to do. What can you bring back to the table? And then you begin to realize over time through the working relationship, like, whoa, they are really good at this. And I'm stepping back. And the nice thing about when you have virtual company and you go into a face-to-face type of scenario, it's that immersion where you begin to see more and more and more by throwing different challenges and having different conversations and trying to solve problems. Whoa, that was really good. Like, you're really good at this. This is not my playground anymore. This is yours. And that really empowers people and unlocks a whole new level of the organization.
Well, and I think also that's why we created the board of directors was, you and I have been coaching for, more than 2 decades now. And, I've had the privilege of working with, hundreds and hundreds of small businesses. But we created the board of directors because we recognize that you have a unique ability. Tom has a unique ability. I have a unique ability. Joe, Zach, Walker, right? Everybody brings a level of mastery in certain things. And so that's why we created that, because we wanted clients to be able to tap in to the zone of genius of everybody on the team and the expertise that we bring. And it's hard to be a jack of all trades. And it sometimes it waters down, some areas that, that I may not be a master in, that you are, for example, or that Tom is, or anyone else on the team. And so it really leverages the strength of the team and being able to serve our clients. So, it's one reason I'm excited and I get up every morning because I know the impact that we're making because of the decision that we made.
Jerson, somebody who, he's from the Philippines, and he came to the company and it was just, I'm going to follow this SOP. But then we began to say, no, actually, you know what? We need you to come to the table with ideas. And just by unlocking that inside of Jerson, he's like, as a company, like, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for some of what he's brought to the table. And I could say the same thing about you and Tom and everybody else. Like, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for all of these. So, it's a really good point, Tom. And I know we're pushing up against the clock. Let me finish up with this one question for each of you. So, this is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say is your biggest, best tip for our listeners today who want to take their business beyond seven figures?
I said it before, and that is, be a good steward of your mental, emotional, and physical state. Be a good steward of that. Be disciplined and intentional around what you choose to focus on, what you choose to take in. What do you want to absorb? Our brain is a computer. You get to choose what goes in, what goes out. So I think the most important thing is be a good steward of this vessel that you wake up with every day at a mental, emotional, and a physical level, and watch your world change.
I love that. And Tom?
Well, you can probably predict what I'm going to say, but it is embrace discomfort and start looking for opportunities to put yourself in situations where the odds of failure are high. You start figuring out solutions. And then now, for me, oftentimes it's something physical, endurance wise, where I want to push myself out there and say, hey, I'm going to run this far, I'm going to bike this far, because I know in doing that, that problems are going to come up. And that's part of the fun is figuring out, all right, I'm in the middle of nowhere. I've got to figure out a solution. What am I going to do here? But all that stuff transitions over to business really well because you're going to hit these situations like we've talked about that are going to come out of the blue. And when you have that right mindset of thinking about solutions and the confidence to know that you can dig deep and figure out how you're going to get through something, problems don't become as big of an issue. So yeah, I would encourage people to think about how can you embrace discomfort and look for those opportunities to put yourself in situations, whether that's physically, whether that's in your business, hey, whether that's socially, where the odds of failure are much higher than the traditional things that you do. And just you'll be surprised at the outcomes that you'll get.
I love it. And I would say, as far as my answer is concerned, in the first couple businesses that I started, I was running away from problems. There would be a problem, I would see it as a negative, and I was constantly running away from problems. I was always trying to run away. I figured my goal was to have no problems. The result of that is it kept me small, kept me unhappy, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry. Heck, at one point I had a self-diagnosed nervous breakdown. But then I came to realize there's a big difference between the game I played and the game the other people played. Small people run away from their problems. Big people create big problems for themselves, right? And I learned that after traveling the world with Tony Robbins, that I could see that big people create big problems for themselves. They don't run away from problems. And I learned that the definition of problem changes as you become more and more successful. It's no longer a problem. You just change the word problem in whatever statement you have, and you interchange that word with opportunity. So some people could say, you know, I have a real problem. Let's just deal with what's in the news today, right? The tariffs that are being applied. That's a big problem for my business. But you know what's interesting? Everybody's playing by the same rules. You can change that. And you could say, the tariffs are an opportunity for me. And where is the opportunity in this? And how can I find the opportunity? And why could this be the best thing in the world that can happen to me? Now, some of these people, this is enough for me to get hate mail and whatever. I get it. It is what it is. But it's the same thing that happened in COVID. It's the same thing that we can look at over and over and over again. Every negative comes with it an equal and opposite opportunity. And so, right, like we can only control the things that we can control, but then there are things that are out of our control. And so there's no sense spending time focusing on the things that are out of our control. That just pulls the power away from you. It makes you a less powerful leader, a less powerful CEO. You have team members that are looking at you. And if you respond back by saying, this is the worst thing that could happen to us, this is a problem, I'm stressed, we're done with, we're screwed, everybody, you know what? They're going to pick up their cues. It's the same way. A kid falls down, they scrape their knee, and they look right away at the parent. If you react, oh my God, the kid's going to start crying and freaking out. But if you look at him, but you're all right, the kid is fine and gets up, brushes it off, and moves on. So, like, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your team to start asking and reframing the questions differently. Why is this the best thing in the world that could happen to us right now? Where's the opportunity in this right now? And if you keep that focus on where's the opportunity, how can this be the best thing in the world? I know I drive my team nuts always on things like this because I could be so anal in this that, the team will come to us with a problem and they're like, I can't believe this happened. I'm so pissed that I didn't see this. I'm so pissed that this was my, and I'm like, okay, why is this the best thing in the world that could happen to me? And inevitably, immediately, I get like this response, like, you have lost your mind. But then over time, as we begin to look at it objectively and change the conversation, we get excited about it. Like, oh, wow, actually, well, we could do this. We could do this. We could do this. And it gets much better. And we've built that into the culture. And now when things happen, like it's easy. I hear Stephanie and I hear Tom immediately go, okay, hey guys, this is what happened. Where's the opportunity in this? And just the level of energy, we can get excited over different problems. It's like really bizarre. People would probably think we're smoking the wacky tobacco, but it's like we get excited about these things, right? Because it's a problem that we get to solve. And it makes us that much better, that much stronger. So something I would encourage you to think about. All right. That wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. We covered a lot. And we talked about everything from health to, mindset and embracing discomfort and just paying attention to, like, what did you say, Stephanie? Wherever your focus goes, energy flows, right? And it's like, don't take mindset for granted. You know, Stephanie also talked about a lot about being intentional. And she's intentional from the moment she opens her eyes to putting her feet down on the floor. Like, how do I want to show up today? How do I want to act? What am I grateful for? Mindset, you have to be really intentional with that mindset. Then Tom gets up every morning, and the way that he manages his mindset is rather than put his feet on the floor, he slips his feet into sneakers, right? And that's the way that he's learned that for him, he becomes an incredibly powerful person ready to tackle the day. So it's going to be different for everybody. And what is it going to be for you that gets you in the zone, that gets you in the state to show up as the leader that you deserve to show up for yourself, for your family, and for your team? Now, if you're looking for more strategies, tips, and information, take your business to that next level to grow your business faster, more predictably, and less dependent on you. Check us out over at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Gadet with my friends, my colleagues, Tom Trush, Stephanie Vaughan, and I will see you in another episode.